Welcome to No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello Jr. Joining me as a guest co-host once again is Anthony Lee. Hello, Anthony.
Hello.
Why don't you briefly remind people who you are and how they know you?
Well, if you watched me last week, I was a guest co-host there as well. I also write a twice-monthly GM advice column on the No Direction podcast site called Behind the Screens. So you might know me from that too.
I love that title.
I can't take credit for it. I was brainstorming with a friend of mine for clever titles, and he came up with it. So I wish I could say I'm that witty, but I'm not.
Well, Anthony, you're our not that witty guest co-host, but the guests for tonight's interview segment, are Paizo's publisher and CCO Erik Mona. Welcome back to the show, Erik.
Hi, Ryan. Hello, Anthony.
Erik, can you remind me what a CCO is?
Yeah, it's a Chief Creative Officer, which basically means I'm in charge of all the creative output at the company. So the art team, the editorial team, all report to me.
Okay, I had the C and I had the O. It was that second C. I couldn't figure out what you were a chief operator of.
I'm the Chief Operator of Creativity.
Very nice.
Yeah.
We're also joined by freelancer and MysteriousPlanchette.com's curator, Brandon Hodge. How you doing, Brandon?
Hey, everybody. Doing just fantastic. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you back. It's been a long time, I think, since your last appearance on the podcast.
I've written a few words since then.
We'll talk about a couple of them. Specifically, Occult Adventures. The Occult Adventure playtest just came to a close yesterday. Hopefully everyone had a chance to participate in it and give their feedback. And now we've got a better part of a year to look forward to that hardcover getting developed and finally coming out. So I guess, Erik, we'll just start off by saying in a game already populated by vampires, witches, and Cthulhu himself, what does Occult Adventures offer to Pathfinder enthusiasts?
I think first and foremost, Occult Adventures offers a way to kind of tap into the secrets of occultism and like psychic energy in a way that Pathfinder has been sort of reticent to embrace up to this point. I think the impetus for this book ultimately is that with the rule system that we're using, psionics has always been a part of it, but for whatever reason, mechanically, it's not really been a part of it that anyone of us on the editorial team at Paizo have really embraced. And so Occult Adventures gives us the opportunity to take a new approach to the mechanics of psychic magic and still get the opportunity to use some of the thematic elements that come with that. Thematic things like, you know, the spirit world, spiritualism, you know, actually giving some meat to the idea of monks' quest for personal and mental and spiritual perfection, auras, chakras, pretty much the whole 9 yards of occultism, anywhere from 19th century spiritualism all the way up sort of to the New Age movement of the early 20th century. We tried really hard to avoid some of sort of like the pastel-colored 1980s, you know, New Age type stuff, but even that is based on a rich tradition that goes back, depending on who you believe or how far you want to go, you know, to the 19th century or even to the beginning of time. And we looked at a lot of those types of elements and figured out how to distill them into the Pathfinder role-playing game, and in particular, how someone who's interested in playing, say, a psychic character would be able to do that with that is different than the 1,000 pages of rules we've already asked them to learn.
And then, Brandon, you were talking about all the words you've written for Pathfinder, in the time since you were last on the show. But most of those words have been in adventures. You're not as well known for your hardcover and your rules work. So why did they invite you into Occult Adventures?
Well, when I'm not freelancing or running a toy shop or a candy store or any other myriad adventures I partake in my day-to-day life, I'm an occult collector. MysteriousPlanchette.com is my most well-known outlet for that. Predominantly a spiritualism historian, seance historian, and I collect spirit communication apparatus and devices from the Victorian era onward. And I'm deeply immersed in the historical study of the occult. It's what I went to college to pursue, and I've been able to turn that interest, that sort of those threads that I carried through college and into my RPG writing, into sort of a sideline. A sideline historian where, I even traveled to Europe this summer to a historical preservation conference to speak to other historians who specialize in spiritualist and occult studies. And so I've been able to make a decent sideline in that. And Mr. Mona, 2 years ago now, 2 PaizoCons ago, approached me and said, he planted the germ, if you will, of this book into my brain and said, I'd like to tap that expertise and try to make this book as authentic as we can make it for, as you already said, for a game where we already have wizards and dragons and sorcerers and occult things. What would be the best way to make that a reality that reflects our own reality? And I hope that we achieve that. I think we're on the right track.
And do you mind just summarizing what is, Mysterious Planchette?
Well, planchettes are automatic writing devices that predate Ouija and talking boards about 40 years. And Mysterious Planchette was a very common actual brand name of a popular planchette. And these writing devices are, anybody can see on the side, they're heart-shaped devices. They have 2 wheels on the back lobes of the heart, and then the third wheel is actually a pencil. So you would place this on a big piece of butcher paper on a tabletop, everyone would place their hands on it, and it would begin to mysteriously move and, write out spirit scribbles.
And where did your fascination with the occult first begin?
Well, I've always, it's funny, just before we went live, Erik was showing us a picture of a Fiji mermaid that he recently acquired. And I would say 2 sources for me. One is my uncle had a picture of the Arkansas merman, which is still on display today. It's a roadside attraction, and it's a bizarre Fiji mermaid. And I remember very early in my life sneaking into my father's sock drawer where he had this little, keepsake box, and that picture was in it. And it's scary. I mean, it's scary for a child. I must have been 6 or 7 years old pulling that picture out literally to scare myself with it. And and we had the 70s tour of the Tutankhamun exhibit, the book you could buy in the gift shop. And I devoured that book as a child. And, the occult got its hooks in me in that way and just never let go.
It's not the kind of picture boys usually find in their father's sock drawer.
No, it's not.
Erik, how about you? I'm sure you're not quite on the same level as occult historian Brandon Hodge, but what is it about the occult that appeals to you?
Well, it's funny. One of the things that first kind of got Brandon himself on my radar was the fact that he collects Ouija boards, because I also collect Ouija boards. As a kid, I kind of got my father's sort of a Hasco Ouija board from the 40s, and it had really wonderful imagery on it. There was a witch in the upper corner and a guy with a turban, some kind of spellcaster or something. I was already into Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy and things like that as a kid, but for the longest time, this wooden press board Ouija board was the oldest thing that I owned. I remember even as recently as moving out to Seattle in 1990. I think it was still 1999. Sorry, I think it was still the oldest item that I had. Of all the stuff that I had, and so it sort of had this legendary place in my head of like this mystery of what this thing was. And as I got onto the internet and things, I started to see that there were a whole ton of different Ouija boards that people had created going back to the beginning of the century, and I, with the help of my brother, who was kind enough to purchase a few for me, started a collection. I've got about a dozen Ouija boards. And so when I found out at an early PaizoCon that Brandon was also a Ouija board collector, that was an easy conversation for us to have. His collection is totally insane. I don't really feel like saying I collect Ouija boards in a podcast with Brandon Hodge is like saying that I used to have Star Wars action figures when I'm over at Lisa Stevens' house and she's like, "Oh, here are all the prototypes," I mean, so there's sort of a journeyman expert divide there. That's part of it. I think another thing too was I was really into Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s during the sort of the first big fad boom for D&D, and that brought with it kind of the counter-reformation, if you will, of like a lot of criticism of the occult elements in the game, and that of course as a kid made it a little bit more attractive to me to figure out exactly what they were talking about. In particular, there are two elements from D&D that made their way into Pathfinder that I was always just curious about, and the ones that actually, I guess three. The astral plane I knew came from occultism. You know, a lot of the outer planes come from mythology, but here's this thing called the astral plane, and I was always curious about what the deal with the astral plane was, because when I would read about it in the manuals, it just seemed like a big barren landscape with nothing there, you know. And I knew there had to be more there, if you will. And so I wanted to figure out what the deal with the astral plane was, and with an eye toward eventually how could I use this and make it more interesting in my campaigns. And then as I became a writer for the game, and then eventually went on to Pathfinder, it was more an issue of like, how can I distill some sort of reality of what the astral plane was supposed to be into the game world to give it a little bit more of a sense of authenticity. So that was one of the things I was always really curious about. The other thing that I was always really curious about was a creature from first edition AD&D called the Monadic Diva. I kind of understood that a diva was kind of dull, but I never really understood what the word monadic meant. You know, it just seemed like a nonsense word. And so when I looked it up, I learned that it was actually a term from a 19th century, early 20th century occult movement called Theosophy, and I wanted to kind of figure out what that meant. And as I delved into what monadic meant, which is a concept of a soul, is basically the monad, if you will, and thus a monadic diva is someone who watches over the souls, incarnate souls. I started reading a lot about reincarnation. I started reading a lot about various spirits, about the spirit world, and what I came to realize was occultism, particularly early 20th century occultism and late 19th century occultism, has got the same sort of syncretic approach that we have in modern game design. So, for example, when we're sitting and trying to decide what monsters we want to put into a Pathfinder bestiary, we of course say, well, what are there any holes in the challenge ratings? Do we need a CR8 plant creature or something along those lines? But we also do, and so we always start by kind of looking there. And I think that in addition to introducing some monsters to the game that have really difficult to pronounce names, they kind of have a sense of authenticity to them that just kind of making up a monster by hitting the keyboard a bunch of times and coming up with a neat idea like, oh, it's a CR8 plant creature. Sometimes those monsters to me don't have the same sort of authenticity as ones that came from the real world. So there's this quest for authenticity, and it really revealed that a lot of these guys and women who were writing about occultism were doing the same thing we're doing with like a bestiary. That, oh, well, there's these myths about ghosts, and how do we plug those in? Where do ghosts come from? You know, what is the relationship between the body and the soul? What happens when your consciousness projects from your physical body out into the astral plane? These are all questions that come up occasionally during a gaming session, or certainly when you're thinking about the sort of metaphysical underpinnings of the world that's implied by the rules of the game. And, you know, the guys doing that for D&D in the 70s, the people doing that for Pathfinder now, the process is very, very similar to what the Theosophists were doing, you know, when they were setting down all of this information. And so just the idea of like this quest for authenticity, albeit authenticity of an extraordinarily fake and charlatan type, you know, manner. I don't buy into occultism really at all, but it's really interesting to me to figure out what the influences that eventually made their way into fantasy gaming, where those things came from, what they're all about. And that's been something I've been interested in since I was a little kid, honestly. But once we started looking at how do we implement psychic rules in Pathfinder, it became sort of more of a professional approach as well, and my interest and my book collection and my reading has just exploded in this arena pretty much over the last couple of years since I started talking to Brandon about it.
And I want to say too, I want to give Erik a little credit too, because we have very different disciplines in our occultism, and in that way it's very complementary. I can regale him with tales of famous spiritualists and mediums all night that he's never heard about, and he can reciprocate with Theosophy on me. So we just have different disciplines. I wouldn't say he's any less qualified than me. It's just different paths.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. It's been, in fact, I mean, part of the fun for me of this whole project has not just been writing the material, working with the design team to come up with mechanical implementations of some of these conceptual things, but also working with Brandon and frankly many of the other freelancers, all of whom have their own sort of area of expertise, so their own interests. And I've learned quite a bit about a lot of different aspects of occultism that I didn't know anything about before. And I think that'll end up carrying through to the final book. I think people are gonna really appreciate not just the ability to kind of bring these things to the game table, but I think they'll probably actually learn some of the you know, the connectivity between some of this stuff in the original lore. And I think that will help everybody kind of better understand, for example, what the ethereal plane is and how it fits in with everything. Because I think these are areas that, because they're a little bit off the beaten path of dragons and gods and things like that, I think a lot of writers, frankly, have just sort of punted on these topics. I think that Occult Adventures will benefit from some of the research that's gone in, and certainly from the enthusiasm of the entire freelancer pool.
Well, the product page even says that the book will include in-depth overviews of key occult topics such as auras, chi, chakras, psychic combat, possession, occult rituals, and the esoteric planes. So in what ways will the book deliver that information? Like, if me as a mundane like someone who knows very little about modern occultism, how will the book help me understand it?
Well, I mean, I think that for example, if you're looking at the astral plane, I wrote the section on the esoteric plane. So that's basically the astral, the ethereal, the positive material plane, or the positive energy plane, the negative energy plane, the material plane, and a couple of associated demi-planes that go with it. The dimension of dreams being one of them, and a new plane called the Akashic Record. That's basically a psychic imprint of all history that's ever happened before. And there's lots of information about these various planes. Let's take the astral, for example. All of the information about how you as a person interact with the astral plane is smushed into a couple of sentences in the astral projection spell. There's not really a lot of information about what the astral plane is, who lives there, what type of adventures you might have while you're there, why you would want to go there, what the relationship between spirits and souls and the transmigration of souls from the death all the way to afterlife, how that all passes through the astral plane, etc. You really have to sort of infer that material from a lot of different sources. Project, and it was crazy. You know, just like 4 or 5 paragraphs of information on each of these planes might have come from 9 different sources throughout various different Pathfinder books that we've done. And so I think one way that the book helps with all this stuff is it just provides the context. I think another way for that the book will do this, because I also wrote the sections on auras and on chakras and on ki, I think it gives table-ready mechanics for you to use with your characters, so it's not just a sort of a philosophical, you know, circle jerk. Basically, it's an actual a thing with game rules that you can use at the table. So by creating, you know, not just saying, oh, an aura is a thing that you can read to tell what emotional state someone's in. It will explain in detail what it is, how it's connected to ki and life energy and vitality and all that kind of stuff, and then a couple of different spells and a couple of different feats and skill uses and things that plug into it. So we're giving people gameable material with context that will help people rooted in their own campaign worlds, even if what they're used to doing is just orcs and dragons and stuff like that. This stuff fits perfectly with that. And
I want to say, too, from a, you know, Ryan, the question you posed, that what Eric's talking about is really sort of the DM information. You know, how is the DM gonna do this? And the other thing, because I wrote with Stephen Townsend the Running an Occult campaign, and there's a lot of information in this book about how all of that information, that worldview, that multiverse view, that planar view, is assimilated by your PCs. So we put that in terms of this veneer of reality, and I think, to turn to some recent shows, Constantine is a very, and of course Hellblazer is a great influence on all of us, really, and Hellboy being another. But that's this. There are these unseen worlds, these unwalked paths, and even in a world where wizards and dragons are familiar, there are still unseen paths and unseen worlds that even they don't tread. And that's what the Occult Adventures delves into. And so it's about peeling back each veneer, these layers, one at a time, to unveil these secrets to your players. And so there are big sections on, here's the secret thing off in the multiverse, the astral plane, the Akashic record, and here's how you can slowly reveal that to your players in mysterious and esoteric ways. And that's going to be a very, very important aspect of this book, because it's, as you stated, it's a fine line to cross when you're already in a fantasy world.
Now, Brandon, I'd like you to complete this sentence, or you fill in this blank with as many words as you think is necessary. Paizo tells you the idea. You say, oh, you're doing a book on the occult. You need to include blank.
Oh, wow. Yes, spiritualism, of course, that's my go-to. So we immediately started talking about mediums and spiritualists. We had discussed, let's see, it must include ectoplasm. I'm the big ectoplasm proponent for this book, and I had my fingers in many freelancer pies, making sure everyone got ectoplasm right, because we didn't want it to be, sticky green goo and he slimed me. That can certainly be an aspect of ectoplasm, but we wanted to make sure that, because ectoplasm is really this thin film, this veil between worlds that spirits drape themselves in order to have a physical presence on our plane. And we wanted to be sure that wasn't hokey and full of Bill Murray jokes. We wanted that to be very cool and reflect what it was historically. So ectoplasm, I was big on getting that right from the very beginning. And players are going to see some archetypes that allow them to really play around with ectoplasm quite a bit. So that'll be fun as well. But, again, I beat the spiritualist and medium horns quite a bit. I don't mean just the class stuff, but, spells in that regard. And I know I've already said it, but the big veneer, the veneer of reality, making sure that we got it right, that we were able to do it right for a fantasy RPG.
Just want to remind anyone that's listening to us live, you can join in on the conversation by posting your comments and questions in the comments section of this YouTube video. And we've got a question from Consumer Unit 553. And it alludes to something you touched on, Erik. He says, any fear about making the game seem satanic? Basically, the satanic controversy of the 80s. Any worry that that's going to come back?
No. Not really. I mean, the book doesn't dwell at all on demons or devils, or I mean, let me put it this way: the book could have ended up being a lot more satanic than it actually was. We didn't really go into that direction. There is rules for possession. There are rules for evil cults and stuff, but we were pretty clear that this wasn't a book about devils or demons. This book is more about, if you're familiar with the sort of planar structure of the Pathfinder world, so there's the inner sphere and the outer sphere. The inner sphere being the material plane, the ethereal plane, the astral plane, the energy planes. And the outer sphere being like Elysium and the Abyss and Hell and stuff like that. This book is much more focused on the inner sphere than on the outer sphere. We have done and will continue to do books about demons and devils and what have you, but that was not part of the remit of this book. Another thing, this book has rules for magic idols. This book has rules for magic rituals. This book does not really touch on the mythos of H.P. Lovecraft. There's not a lot of Cthulhu elements in this book. It's not in particular a horror book as it is an occult book. I do think that if you took Occult Adventures and brought it back to 1983 and put it on with a couple of fundamentalist preachers or something like that, they probably wouldn't care for the book very much. But quite frankly, that's probably true of pretty much everything Paizo publishes, so I don't really see there being a huge line there. I do think there's going to be elements in this book that you can add pretty easily to intense sort of the creepy factor of your game, but there's really nothing about, Lucifer or Satan, or I don't think it's so much mustache twirly kind of Anton LaVey sort of stuff. I don't know, Brandon, what do you think?
No, I agree. I mean, and that was actually kind of a point of contention a little bit. I felt there should have been a little bit more demonology in there, but you do get idols. So Eric already mentioned that, and that was, Ryan, your question to me. Idols was one of my big keywords because I already had home rules for them, and so players are going to get to see how these oddly semi-sentient objects of worship can become incredibly sentient and incredibly powerful near demigod objects of veneration, with cults numbering the thousands. And there's going to be rules for that. And yeah, as Eric just said, the part about sacrificing to your idol to increase its power might not have gone over so well in '83, but we think the Pathfinder fans are going to love it.
Let's talk about the classes then, because that's the only part of the book that the player base, the Pathfinder enthusiasts, have really gotten a touch of. So how do the 6 base classes really bring out different elements of the occult?
I'll start with that, Eric.
Sure.
Well, I think the medium and the spiritualist, and maybe I'll take half of them, Eric. You take the other. I'll talk medium and spiritualist, since those are aspects I push for the hardest. Speaking with the dead in the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game and Pathfinder has largely been confined to a handful of incorporeal undead. Now with Pathfinder, Paizo was nice enough to give us the haunt rules, which of course I adore, and then the Speak with Dead spell, and a few other things here and there. And that Speak with Dead was sort of where it ended. But Speak with Dead didn't really begin things properly. As we know through the legacy of that spell, it sort of semi-animates the corpse, and you're not truly calling on the spirit of the dead. You're sort of making the corpse a temporary simulacrum to answer some questions. And so we wanted to really crack that open in this book, and you get that in 2 classes. You get one in the more ethereal tapping, or the more astral tapping, I should say, medium, who actually does not physically manifest spirits of the dead, but rather lets them possess their body. And of course, we probably don't need to talk too much about how possession has a long history in the occult. But so you have that, and then on the other hand, you have the more physical aspects of the spiritualist, which is actually drawing that spirit forth through the ethereal veil and draping them in ectoplasm and letting them take form in our world. So between those 2 classes, a lot of the classic aspects of historical spiritualism, whether it be something more like direct voice channeling or automatic writing, is going to come through with the medium, whereas the spiritualist is more sort of the Katie King, Florence Cook figure who's actually manifesting this creature in our world. So a lot of those bases are covered. What's my 3rd class, Eric? I'll take one more.
You can take the psychic or the mesmerist.
Oh, the mesmerist, absolutely. So animal magnetism and spiritualism have historically gone very hand in hand. Animal magnetism is a theory most closely associated with Anton Mesmer, and that was the theory that there are a magnetic fluid that courses through the human body, and, well, to be honest with you, all things. It is very much the Force. This living energy that binds everything and penetrates everything. And so animal magnetism were theories of this animalistic fluid that flows through humans and objects and animals, everything, the universe, and how that can be manipulated. And this will eventually, in its modern form, evolve into modern concepts of hypnotism. We're going to discard the fact that there's this biological fluid that's causing all this, but the results of the experimentations, the whole light as a feather, stiff as a board phenomenon, true hypnotism, mesmerism, as it's historically classified, so much. I think when we were in the middle, when the classes were first debuted, when the mesmerists came along, That was the first high five I gave out, was to Logan Bonner for his design on that class, because so many of those tricks that the mesmerist can do are so spot on with historical mesmerism. And that really was why Erik brought me on, was, you know, how can we do these fantasy equivalencies of historical concepts of these different modes of belief. And the mesmerist, I think, of all the classes, really nails it the closest. I mean, so many of those tricks, Logan plucked right out of the historical record, and I think that class really nails it in a lot of ways, historically and in a fantastic concept.
Erik, that leaves 3 classes for you to sum up.
Okay, so the other 3 classes, there is the Occultist, and the Occultist takes a cue from sort of a John Constantine character, maybe Giles from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files. This is a character who is primarily getting their abilities through manipulation of potent magical objects. So the Occultist has a number of different implements that he can use to channel sort of his powers. This allows us to play with the idea of object reading or psychometry. That's a major power of the Occultist. The Occultist also has some abilities with different rituals and things like that. So the Occultist is really kind of the character who is less sort of inherently psychic, but it kind of understands the tricks of the multiverse, and by using special items is able to kind of create magical effects. He's also not strictly like a spellcaster. You know, he's of the 6 characters, he's the one who has some of the best martial abilities as well. We have the other one is the Psychic. Psychic is essentially your generalist psychic class that has the widest variety of psychic powers. They also have different disciplines, and those disciplines kind of specialize their abilities in a similar way to like wizard specialty for sorcerers, and that is just there to kind of be your catch-all. I just want to play a psychic character. And then the last class, which is the one that has received, I think, by far the largest number of replies and enthusiasm from the playtest, is the Kineticist. The Kineticist has the ability to basically move things around with their mind, taking a lot of cues from like The Last Airbender, from Eastern mysticism. These are your telekineticists, your pyrokineticists, so like Stephen King's Firestarter would be a pyrokineticist, and they have a lot of different ways to manipulate those elements, and then the other element of ether, so to speak, for telekinesis. And basically, unlike normal Pathfinder class, it doesn't use the spell system. Like, you don't cast a fireball. You have different abilities to shape and manipulate fire as a part of your class features. Because I think that space that we're exploring within this book, the reaction to it has been really phenomenal, both in terms of people really putting the new rules through their paces and making sure that some of the decisions that we made in-house about the class are the right decisions, but also just the level of enthusiasm people have for this, because it is like a legitimately new approach to a Pathfinder class. It was designed, I should say, by Mark Seifter, who is the newest member of the Pathfinder RPG design staff, and he's brought a real fresh level of enthusiasm to the team, and has never shied away from trying new things. So he went forward with a really bold design for the Kineticist, and it has really I think struck a chord with a lot of players. So that's kind of the overview of the 6 classes.
Was there any other feedback from the... Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just one quick thing I wanted to add, actually, and that's a little bit of why I personally am really excited about this book, above and beyond all the stuff we've been talking about. I'm interested in the themes and things. Mechanically, I'm interested in this book because it feels like a real step forward in terms of what the team has been willing and able to do with the Pathfinder rules as a whole. If you go back over the last couple of books that we published or are in the pipeline, you know, we've got, unfortunately delayed because of a printing error, but we've got the strategy guide that's about to come out at the beginning of next year. The strategy guide is a kind of a exploration of the rules in the core rulebook, and really like a great book to hand to a new player who just wants a thin volume to learn how to play the game, but you don't want to intimidate them with the whole 600-page Pathfinder core rulebook. But it is nonetheless a representation of rules that many of us are very familiar with. The Advanced Class Guide that just came out is it's got 10 new character classes, but what it does is it takes basically 2 existing character classes, smooshes them together, comes up with a new mechanic for each, but fundamentally you're dealing with concepts that already sort of exist in the game, and this is just a refinement of how to, say, pull off what amounts to a multi-class character. The Monster Codex, which just came out, is a phenomenally useful book. I've used that book in almost every session I've run since we put it out. That book has tons of stat blocks for like orcs and bugbears and hobgoblins and rat folk and boggards and things that you want to use again and again. You just don't want to kind of spend the time to do a 9th level spellcaster stat block. But again, this is taking material that kind of already exists and just making it easier for people to use. Occult Adventures takes legitimately new concepts and then really fresh, and especially in the case of the kineticist, design approaches to the class. And I think that those people who have maybe been looking at the game saying, wow, Pathfinder came out in 2007 as a brand, 2009 as a game, we're in year 5, it's starting to kind of feel like there's nothing new to be done. I really think that the kineticist kind of takes that idea and then tosses it to the other side of the room with its mind sort of nonchalantly and says, haha, there is a lot more to do. And I think that the level of sort of boldness, and sometimes it pays off, and sometimes the playtest says, yeah, rein it in a little bit, but I think that the approach that these guys took with these classes has been really refreshing to me, and I see that there's future, there's more room to innovate and more room to design in Pathfinder, and that to me is really exciting. And I think that we've seen comments along those lines in the playtest as well. I think people, the difference in the response and the enthusiasm of the playtest for Occult Adventures over, say, something like the Advanced Class Guide, I think is significant, and I think it's a harbinger of how people are going to respond to this book when it actually comes out.
Are there any other interesting notes from the playtest? Anything that surprised you?
Well, I mean, I think that the degree to which people really embraced the kineticist and got under the hood and tried to really kind of help out fine-tuning that class really surprised, I think, all of us. I think poor Mark, has been a little blown away, having never been through this process from the Paizo side of it before. Just the amount of feedback on that has been really intriguing. I think in terms of the individual, change this or that, specific playtest feedback, I think maybe the design team would be a little bit better suited to answer that question specifically. I think at this stage they've been paying attention all along, but I think now they're at that phase where it's like, okay, let's go through all the threads again, let's kind of aggregate some of those comments and see kind of what the majority of people thought. They also did the class surveys, which just closed a couple of days ago. I confess I haven't even really looked at the responses to that yet. That's something that the design team has been grappling with the last couple of days, and so it's a little, for me anyway, it's a little too early to sort of say, yes, I think that we're going to change this, and this based on the feedback. But Jason and the other designers could probably answer that question a little bit more elaborately, and I think in particular if you ask them a few weeks from now as opposed to right now, they're still sort of in the thick of it.
We'll keep that in mind when we're scheduling interviews for January and February then.
Great.
Absolutely.
Anthony, I've kind of been neglecting you and our audience. Do you think you can read up some of the audience questions we've received?
Sure. Let's see. It's going from early asked. Joe Smith asks, did the inclusion of the Pathfinder Society boon for playtesting help drive up number reports for playtest on PFS scenarios? I guess that's more of a question for John Compton or
yeah, I mean, again, I don't have specifics. I know that it has. Yeah, I know that we did playtesting of the playtest versions of the Advanced Class Guide classes in Pathfinder Society campaign, and the way that we did it this time was a little bit of a what we hope was a refinement of that system. So there was an impetus to playtest the new classes during the period of the playtest, as opposed to just letting people continue to play them. And then your ability to get benefits from that accrued the more that you playtested. I was really blown away, actually, by the number of specific playtest reports that were logged on our website this time around. And I know many of those were Pathfinder Society. So, we really, really appreciate the environment of Pathfinder Society when it comes to a playtest, because those guys can really put these things through their paces in real time, as opposed to just sort of theory crafting an encounter and saying, well, let's run the kineticist through an 8th level fight and see how it goes. These people will be playing these classes for multiple levels, with adventures, frankly, that were not designed with these classes in mind. But that's going to be true of the people who play these classes when they come out. Will have been done almost a decade of adventures at that point, and those adventures need to kind of work with these classes as well. So it has been, I think, a big benefit to us to have it going on in the Pathfinder Society campaign.
Great. Let's see. Chaotic Campaign would like to know whether or not Occult Adventures will include a explanation of reincarnation in the Pathfinder campaign setting, whether or not it's optional, or if the gods happen to dabble in it, or what the case might be there.
Would you repeat the line right before whether the gods dabble in it? I had a little bit of lag.
Oh, sure. Whether it's optional, or the gods dabble, sort of free will reincarnation in Galarian and the outer planes.
So the question is, how does reincarnation fit in?
Right, and will that be detailed at all in Occult Adventures?
Yes, it will. So that was one of the things that had been kind of a bugaboo of mine from the start. Reincarnation is such a major part of Eastern mysticism and theosophy and hence occultism that I was really underwhelmed by kind of some of the approaches that we had sort of taken to reincarnation. I think part of that's practical. I mean, you're playing a character during the course of a campaign, and sort of having all kinds of rules about here's what happens over multiple generations, in fact, over thousands of years as you incarnate and then go into the afterlife briefly, and then come back in a new form, possibly with hundreds or thousands of years in between each of those incarnations. That doesn't really lend itself that well to a game where you're primarily playing the same character all the way through. There is, of course, the reincarnate spell, which can play into this, but in terms of sort of how does reincarnation fit into what we call the river of souls, the transmigration of a character's soul into the afterlife? To me, even our best sort of official takes on that topic came across as really cursory. I mean, if you look at books like The Guide to the Great Beyond, or you look at even Wes Schneider's fantastic River of Souls article that recently appeared in the back of a Mummy's Mask adventure, the concept of reincarnation in Pathfinder has always been just kind of a throwaway reference. So we'll spend like 3,000-4,000 words talking about, well, if you believe in Iomedae, then you die and you appear in the boneyard, and you are eventually judged by Pharasma and sent to your correct place in the afterlife, where you incarnate as an outsider or perhaps as just a petitioner, and eventually you either continue this development as an outsider or you fade back into the quintessence of the plane. That was like basically the approach. And then basically in terms of reincarnation, it was always like maybe 100 words tops of like, oh yeah, and some souls reincarnate, And so I had to kind of figure out how to fit some of the aspects of occultism that rely on not just reincarnation, but the kind of idea that everyone reincarnates, universal reincarnation. The approach that we'd published to date had sort of precluded that every single person is in this constant cycle of reincarnation, at least on a time scale that anyone would understand. And so trying to figure out how to emphasize that in a way that didn't upset the apple cart of everything else we'd already talked about in transmigration was difficult, but I think I pulled it off. And so basically, in the esoteric planes section where we're talking about the boneyard, there is a process. One of the fundamental questions I had to ask the guys who designed the boneyard was, okay, and this will this is the type of questions that we don't necessarily get into explicitly in the book, but that I had to know so that I could write the broad strokes of the book. I mean, the esoteric plane section we're talking about, it's only a handful of pages. It's not a huge campaign setting or anything, but it does have to contextualize things like how does reincarnation fit into the game. And so I had to ask questions like, for example, okay, so we've seen pictures, we've seen illustrations of the boneyard, which is Pharasma's plane in the outer planes where souls go and are sorted to go in their final resting place in the afterlife. So we've seen images of these sort of cloaked, glowing blue figures essentially standing in line waiting for judgment. They look really, really cool. And so I went to the team that had come up with the boneyard, and I said, okay, if I plane shift to the boneyard and I see the glowing blue body of my friend, the companion who just died, what level of interaction can I have with that character? What is that character? Furthermore, we know that character's consciousness is in that shiny body, but what is that shiny body? Is that their astral form that's been cut free from the tether to their physical body? Is that some new thing? Is that a bone lands body? What is that? And while they're standing in line, we know from the lore that had been established, some people get processed very rapidly. Some people immediately incarnate as outsiders on their appropriate plane. Other people have to stand years or centuries in line waiting for their final judgment. Why do some people take longer than others? If I go to my companion and I find him standing there in a shiny blue body and I'm somehow able to interact with him, what is he doing while he's standing there for 100 years waiting to be judged? And so through that process, we kind of came up with the idea of the Great Beyond to a thing called the Lake of Mortal Reflections, and this is mentioned as kind of a location that's not on any map, but it's this lake, and that when you look into it, you see reflections from your past. And that to me reminded me of an occult concept called the Kamaloka, which after a spirit dies and withdraws from its physical body onto the astral plane, into its astral form, it relives scenes from its life. This is sort of your life flashing before your eyes, right? Again, this is a phenomenon occultists observe in the real world and then try to kind of make up a series of rules for why these things are happening. And so that's where the Kamaloka comes from. That's where this idea of your life flashing before your eyes comes from. And so I took this throwaway reference to this thing called the Lake of Mortal Reflections in the Great Beyond, and I worked that into the boneyard proper. And I said the reason that it's not found on any map is that it's more of a metaphorical process than an actual location you go to. While you were standing in line waiting to be judged, your mind is going on this journey where it is reliving scenes from your mortal incarnation. And as it kind of deals with those things, those traumas, those positive memories, those negative memories, those memories fade away. And this is why, like a petitioner, for example, might not remember its mortal incarnation. We've already established a lot of outsiders don't really remember their mortal life. That's because presumably they've gone through this Lake of Mortal Reflections process, and they have dealt with essentially the events of their life. This is, by the way, how karma works in Eastern mysticism. And so the idea being that the secret of occultism is that during this process, when you're reliving your memories by taking a glimpse into the Akashic record, you can sort of subsume yourself in the waters of the Lake of Mortal Reflection and re-enter the mortal world of the nation. And so it's an option that is essentially available to every single living creature in the multiverse, and they just may or may not know how to pull it off. And some people could probably, it could happen to Dake or something as well. But so I hope all that makes sense. I guarantee it makes sense in the 300 words or something that I used to describe it in the book. But the idea being that reincarnation is a much more robust part of the transmigration of souls post-Occult Adventures than it was before.
Woo! Wow. No, that's amazing. I'm really excited to read that. A lot of my players are sort of struggling with the sort of revolving door sort of policy with death and dying and raised ding. So having touched upon the Boneyard and bits of the Great Beyond, Venkathalma would like to know what other regions of Galarian might be more touched by occult themes than others.
Okay, there's a handful. We don't go much into Galarian in the campaign setting in this book because this book is an RPG line book. So the outer planes and the inner and outer sphere are sort of an implied version of the Pathfinder rules in general. Not everybody uses Galarian, so it's going to probably be in a different book that will explore some of these themes within the context of Galarian. We've done that in the past with like Mythic Realms and the Mythic Origins books in the campaign setting and player companion lines respectively. And I would expect to see a similar approach here. But just off the top of my head, I think there's a number of different places where it makes a lot of sense. We've long sort of said that Vudra, the Indian analog, East Indian analog realm in Galarian, was rich with psychic power. There, I think Ustalov has a lot of opportunity for some of this stuff, particularly on the spiritualist and medium side of things. I think that one of the other things that we've talked about is that in particular the planet of Castrovel, which is based on sort of the pulp approach to Venus. Those stories back in the 30s and 20s often had psychic powers associated with them, and so that has naturally been a location within our campaign setting where we also figured psychic powers are particularly strong. There you have airships that are powered by psychic thought. You have the Lashunta, which are a psychic race in and of themselves. The Darklands is another major place where I think psychic power has been strong for quite some time. The Occult Adventures book includes specifically psychic versions of a lot of Darklands monsters for people who want to have a little bit more of a psychic approach to them. Darrow, Duergar, things like that. Those are the ones kind of off the top of my head. I do think Varisia also, we've also got a tradition of Harrow, which is based on the tarot, which plays into the archetypes. Actually, that's not what we call them. The Phantom. Brandon, what do we call the medium spirits? They're just spirits, actually. So
Right,
the spirits for the medium.
The medium, to clarify that, they are spiritual archetypes that conform to the 54 archetypes represented by the Harrow deck.
Right. So you could see how that would tie into Varisia, for example. I think that there's one of the things we're trying to do with these, and this is one of the reasons why we didn't sort of just go with the 3.5 version of the psionics rules. It's why we call it psychic magic instead of just psionics. Is we don't want to give the impression that there is this vast thematic gulf between arcane and divine magic and psychic magic. You know, once you start saying psionics and once you start sort of using terms like metaphysician and all that kind of stuff, metakinesis, what have you, these things are like scientific terms. The whole term of psionics came from the science fiction pulps where they were trying to have more of a scientific approach to some of this stuff. And it always struck me as very sort of mid to late 20th century to do that. And I think that that's one of the reasons why there's a disconnect in some people's mind between, say, psionics and arcane magic. I think that the main reason is, of course, that it's a different rule set. And that was the major thing that we did not want to do with this book. We did not want you to have to learn an entire new sort of rules for how to cast magic spells when there are perfectly good rules for how to cast magical spells in the game already that everybody understands. So so we basically that's it. There you go. That's the places in Galarian where I think psychic stuff makes the most sense.
Brandon, I'm just going to point out, we asked you for an hour of your time, and it's coming up to that hour now. Are you still good to hang around for a
no,
little
let's
bit?
go. Come on. I get to talk. I haven't been able to talk about this stuff with anybody but Erik and other freelancers for months.
All right. Derek Caldemeyer has a question about the medium, which is one of your classes.
Well, it's not one of my classes. That was designed also by Mark Simon.
Sorry.
So. But I did, you know.
It was one of the ones you summed up earlier.
All right. What is the question?
He loved the class and all its flavor. Which class from the playtest are you most proud of? You know what? Sorry, this is a little bit more technical than I was thinking. Well, we'll go with it anyway. Which class from the playtest are you most proud of and love for its representation of the occult?
I guess we can both answer that one, Erik. I already went off on the mesmerist and how much I liked it. The other, I think, is the occultist itself. I really when Eric and I first started talking about this book, I also in my home game have an alternate magic item system that is about empowering relics, and it doesn't have a lot of similarities to what Jason ultimately did with the occultist class, but thematically it touches on very similar territory, and I really love how the occultist is the non-magic user magic user, right? And I really love the occultist, the magic circles aspect of the class, and the fact that they can do those more creatively and speed them up as they increase in levels. And there's going to be some really fantastic archetypes coming out for the occultist class. I worked on some of them, and as well as Eric mentioned, the occultist is also the big psychometrist. We're going to have new means for some of those psychic tricks to be explored by all classes, and in unforeseen ways that maybe if Eric wants to open that up, we can talk about. But it's something again that I worked on. So I think the occultist captures, fittingly enough, given its name, I think the occultist captures some very good occult flavor along with the mesmerist for sure in this one.
It's funny you should say that because I played in a game with both a mesmerist and an occultist, and it was a first level game, so there's only so much you can actually, so much of the theme can be translated into mechanics. But the mesmerist I got right away. I was really feeling exactly how this is separated from all the other classes. But the occultist played very similar to a wizard, at least from my point of view as a different player at the table. So in what ways does the occultist separate itself further from a wizard, mechanically or thematically? Well, thematically I get, but mechanically.
I think actually a lot of that, because it may be that I imagine how I will play an occultist more so than how the mechanics might outline how it should be played. And that's not to say I'm not going to follow those mechanics, but I'm also infamous in my home group for having played what is essentially the spiritualist now as a summoner. I took the summoner class and turned it into this ectoplasmic wielder spiritualist well before we ever even talked about this book. And so I imagine for me, having those implements be very flavorful. If I'm at the table and I'm running an occultist, everyone at the table is going to know the history and the background of the implements that I'm handing them to use, for instance. And so I think, for me anyway, a lot of that just turns the wheels for me and how I would play that at the table. And might not translate, like you said, mechanically it might run just like a wizard, or very similar to a wizard. And that, I won't dispute that. I will say, though, in my hands, that class would drip with flavor. There wouldn't be a single item in my pockets that didn't have a detailed history, whether it be a relic or the mummified head of a wizard's rat familiar from 3 generations ago, or whatever the case may be. Everything in that occultist pockets and repertoire would have some sort of occult history.
I think one of the comments that came through on the playtest, for the occultist is people saying, and I think it's kind of a version of what you're saying, Ryan, is just kind of like, this class kind of reminds me of how wizards are often portrayed in other media and stuff, right?
Yes.
It's not the Pathfinder wizard or the D&D wizard or the Gauntlet wizard, for lack of a better term, where you just shoot stuff out of your hand every round and you just everything's about this book, or the sort of the Jack Vance approach, right? This is a little bit more. I think some people see it a little bit more like the way magic is described in some of these sort of real-world occult sort of texts. It is a lot of goofing around with magic circles. It is a lot of sussing out the powers of some weird magical artifact or what have you. And I guess from my perspective, I'm fine with that. If the class offers a different approach that is currently lacking mechanically in the game for you to play the type of character that you want to play, I can live with that for sure. I can live with that happily.
A lot of comments said that, well, I don't need a wizard anymore. I have this now. There were a lot of comments from posters on that, and hey, I'm with Eric. I can live with that too, and we'll probably have to.
I think we're in the process of living with it.
Yeah, I think so.
I do. I'm curious about the timing for this book because when Mythic Adventures came out, it was to tie into Wrath of the Righteous, which was the Mythic Adventure Path, and often we'll see a lot of the hardcovers have an adventure path kind of, released around the same time. There's doesn't seem to be anything occult on the schedule for the adventure paths. We know Giant Slayer and then Hell's Rebels, neither of which are occult in theme. So why now? Why this Gen Con for Occult Adventures?
Couple of different reasons. When we looked at the books we wanted to do, just sort of mechanically, this was the one we were kind of most excited about. The design team has been itching to kind of get their hands on sort of the thematic elements of psychic and psionics for a long time, and this seemed like a good time to do that. I probably would have put a occult themed adventure path on the schedule for the one after Hell's Rebels, except that the idea that we have in the hopper for the one after Hell's Rebels is that I would rather do that. And so I think we'll see some support for Occult Adventures in the modules line. I think we'll see some support for Occult Adventures in the campaign setting and in the player companions line. But another thing that we've been hearing in terms of feedback on the adventure path as a whole, and something I've really taken to heart, is I think that the adventure paths kind of need to be great stories in and of them, great stories first and foremost, and a method for us to sell other products sort of somewhere down the line. You know, if you look at the difference between the number of books that you need to run, say, Rise of the Rune Lords, and the number of books that you need to run Wrath of the Righteous, which includes the Mythic Adventures and all kinds of other books, I don't really want to publish adventure paths that need you to own 10 books just in order to run them, right? And so it's a little bit of an experiment, and quite frankly, it's probably a little bit risky because I do suspect that you know, an occult-themed adventure path would help sell more. It just didn't really seem like the right thing to do given some of the other variables on the table at the time. It'll make more sense once you guys find out what the post-Hell's Rebels adventure path is.
But it's officially...
Which I cannot say on pain of death. My own, it would have to be suicide because it's my death order on everybody. Right. But that would be a no direction first.
That you kill yourself on the podcast?
Yeah.
Yes, I hope it's a first that never happens.
I will promise you guys, if I do a live suicide, I'll give you the exclusive.
Wow. Yeah, Shatuka, huh?
Thanks.
Not sure it's a good thing.
It is unlikely to happen. Never say never.
Please say never.
I've learned that. In publishing, I have learned that. Never say never about anything.
Matt Wilson's question kind of ties into mine. He says, with over 20 player classes, he says 30 plus prestige classes, I think there may be even way more than that. But why add 6 more base classes?
Why add more base classes? Is that the question? I think that's a good question because there's tons. The advanced class guide, and so adding new classes is something we're sort of reticent to. I mean, it's hilarious to say that when you look at how many there are, but the truth of the matter is we need to be really careful about adding new classes, and I think the reason why we're adding these in particular is that we've always sort of segregated these psychic and psionic themes off to the side, and we've always said we'll get to those concepts once we kind of know mechanically what we're doing with the psychic rules, and we finally have figured that out. And so naturally, all those classes and class concepts that have sort of been waiting on the side kind of come to the fore now. And I don't want to just like, okay, here's how psychic magic works. We'll give you 2 classes now, and then a year from now we go, oh, wouldn't it have been cool to have done a mesmerist class? Oh, yeah, let's do that in a different book and have it tie into stuff from it. I just want to get it all out at once. I mean, I think that's the smartest thing to do. That said, I think that psychic classes are, for me anyway, kind of the last big motherlode of concepts that we haven't really touched. There probably will be, more character classes down the road. We're not working on any right now. I can't. Honestly, I'm having a hard time thinking of ones that jump immediately to mind. I mean, we haven't really done sort of something to answer to kind of the Artificer class in particular. I could think of maybe a couple of other ones. I can't think of another general theme book that would sustain 6 more new classes in one shot. I think from here forward, you're likely to see, if there are new classes associated with a book, probably fewer than 6. Certainly fewer than 6. But yeah, it's something we're mindful of. We want to kind of to straddle the line between giving people opportunities to play whatever type of character they want to play and not just sort of flooding the game. I think that in retrospect, the advanced class guide probably would have been better with 6 classes than 10. It would have given us a little more time to kind of fine-tune every single one of them, and some of the classes concepts in there I think are a little bit more are better than some of the other ones, are a little more in the zeitgeist and as things someone would actually play, as opposed to seeing and going, oh, yeah, I guess I could play that. That's not really the reaction I want. I want people to go, oh, hell yeah, you know, I could do this and I could do that with that character class. As long as we can come up with mechanical ideas that generate that type of response, I'm comfortable adding new classes to the system. I mean, the fact is, although every time we add a new class, then some people will say, oh, well, the game's getting bloated, it's getting harder to learn, etc. And to some degree that's true. Whenever we put out new classes, that's the thing that gets people the most excited. That's the thing that gets people, you know, wanting to do new characters and all that. And all that's really important, you know, for keeping the game healthy and interesting for people to play.
You've talked in the past about a couple of things like, oh, well, the game can't do this yet, so I look forward to when that happens. Like the Swashbuckler was something that was on your wish list for a while. I can't think of anything.
Yeah, because we'd sort of.
No, go ahead.
Well, yeah, the Swashbuckler is a good example. You know, I mean, the game rules in the core rulebook don't really get us there. And so we tried to sort of a couple of times through various archetypes sort of say, well, here's a little Band-Aid on that problem, you know, and maybe that'll be good enough. And I just don't think the players or really anyone at Paizo was totally satisfied with the answer. I think the Investigator is kind of another class. You know, the Swashbuckler and Investigator are definitely classes in the Advanced Class Guide that I feel are just like fastballs right down the, you know, the plate in terms of what people would want and what concepts work in a Pathfinder campaign, and so that those are examples of us keeping on doing it until we get it right. It's like I said, it's really hard for me to come up with a lot more ideas in terms of stuff that we could do. I said that to somebody at work the other day, and then they rattled off like 4 or 5, and I was like, yeah, okay, those are good ideas, but and I think that's important when you're talking about putting out a book.
I still can't make the Incredible Hulk. Just saying. Until I can make the Incredible Hulk.
There is an archetype in Occult Adventures that I think you'll be really happy with.
An occult Incredible Hulk, though? I don't know.
Yeah, just the kind of idea. Well, if you stretch your concept of occultism to include things like Eastern mysticism. So think about like the character Dal Sim from Street Fighter, you know, who's got those long stretchy arms that he can, there's sort of the body manipulation aspect. There's always been a body manipulation aspect of psychic and psionic power. And so keep an eye out. I'm not saying it's going to give you the, you know, guy in purple shorts who turns green and is 3 sizes bigger than he used to be or anything like that. But I specifically asked for a psychic archetype that allows people to sort of Hulk out, so to speak. And I haven't seen it come through yet, but I think you'll be pleased. And I don't know that that's a class. You know, I mean, insofar as the Barbarian allows you to Hulk out, Hulk is a character class. And the same way that I'm not really sure Captain America is a character class. You know, we did a Shield Guardian archetype in the Advanced Class Guide that kind of plays off of that idea, but it's based on another existing class, not a brand new class. The line between what's an archetype and what's a class is A, totally subjective, but B, I think pretty dangerous sometimes. You can kind of, so okay, I'm going to make the Hulk. Well, what archetypes do you build for the Hulk class? The Abomination. I mean, like it's pretty narrow already. So to me, the Hulk is more of an archetype than a class.
Speaking of archetypes named after Marvel characters, you've got the Ghost Rider Cavalier.
Mm-hmm. I wrote that one. Yeah.
Tell me about the Ghost Rider Cavalier. That sounds amazing.
How much can I reveal, Mr. Publisher Man?
You can reveal whatever you want, Brandon. It's no direction.
Right. So the Ghost Rider Cavalier is going to take a cue from the spiritualist and quite literally summons an ectoplasmic mount to ride. And so it, in effect, actually does ride a ghost mount. And there is going to be, and they are thematically hunters of the incorporeal dead and the spectral dead. So they're going to take a little bit from the Inquisitor and the Paladin in that sense. So they're going to be these sort of grim, pale riders. And for the actual fans of Ghost Rider, they do have a sort of stare, sort of a 1,000-yard stare thing. So the whole penitent gaze thing. So it's a pretty neat archetype. I really like the mount aspect of it, that they actually stride into town on this withered, ghostly ectoplasmic horse, and then they're a far cry from sort of the stalwart, heroic, charging, shield and banner bearing cavaliers. That's for sure. They are a much darker take on that class, and have a lot going for them. I'm really excited for people to see them.
I threw that on the outline originally because I was going through each class sort of systematically and saying what would be the occult archetypes that would go with this class, and when I hit Cavalier, I was like, oh geez, I don't know. But I had like that was it Marty Robbins who sings the Ghost Riders in the Sky song,
right?
And it's just been covered a million times, and then of course Riders on the Storm by the Doors. Both of these songs are these weird kind of ethereal. There's a haunting quality to both of those things, and of course Marvel's Ghost Rider as well, both in the sort of the cowboy incarnation and then the Johnny Blaze version. And I just kind of threw that in the outline as a challenge and just said, here's all these different references and ideas, make it happen. And I was really pleased to see that Brandon.
Yeah. I snatched it up immediately, and there is to talk on the. I just brought up the spectral dead hunting aspect. I don't want to conflate too much because there is an accompanying order for the Order of the Shroud, and so I am kind of conflating the two when I talk about the whole package, because I do see them as very complementary. So there's a couple of goodies in there.
Now, are there flames involved in any way?
They're actually, I don't want to disappoint anyone, but I did not involve flaming skulls in any way.
Right.
Unfortunately. I thought
homages,
that was just,
like I said, the line between class and archetype is treacherous and very delicate. The line between homage and ripoff is pretty close as well.
You get the penitent gaze, all right?
Right. It's sometimes an issue of just taking inspiration from something as opposed to just copying it outright.
I can find other ways to add flames. I'm still good.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think someone on the boards already came up with it, and they don't even know no one knows what that class does until I just said it. So, but someone was like, "Oh, if it does this, and I can do this, and I can have a flaming skull head," and I was like, "Okay."
Brandon, you and I have talked about this a couple of times, but one of the things that's really cool is, we've dropped some hints like the Ghost Rider, a couple of other things, and a number of. Like, for instance, when we just said, oh, there's going to be a medium class in the game, there were some people who came out of the woodwork and they'd be like, oh, I hope it does this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
And Brandon and I were laughing because it's like, what does this guy have a copy of the manuscript? Like, yeah, it does all those things. And I think that just kind of goes to show that there is sort of a common lore that we're tapping into with a lot of this stuff. And I think people are going to be pretty excited when they get the book. I think it will. I think it's going to be a fairly common occurrence where people will say, "I wonder if they thought about this," and then they'll find that, in fact, yes, we did think of it, and it's in that book. I mean, this book, because I got so heavily involved personally, and because we had Brandon on staff, and because, frankly, the design team also has some interest in this material, I think the outline that before we even started for this book was probably more robust than any outline that we've done for, which I think is a good thing. I don't know if that's clear.
No, I think your enthusiasm is coming through.
Oh, good.
We are excited.
Anthony, can you give us a couple more questions from the audience?
Sure. Let's see. Darren Kaldemeyer is waving his Mark Moreland Allegiance flag and is asking you, what regions in Galarian would you feel have an occult feel in the upcoming Armies of Galarian book?
Oh God. Oh yeah. Put Erik
Is
on
that,
the
is
spot
that guy a
about
Mark
that.
Moreland partisan or a Brandon Hodge partisan?
Yes.
Well, it's both of us because Mark is the big proponent for that book, and I'm right behind him because I'm the one that initially pitched that to try to get it on the schedule because I created the troop subtype and have been really pushing for Paizo to take that and run with it, and I'm trying. Put Erik on the spot. You don't need to talk me into it. I created the stuff, so put Erik on the spot.
To answer the question seriously, the countries that would have occult elements to them are kind of, I think, some of the ones that I already mentioned. Within Galarian in particular, Varisia, Jalmaray, Ustalov. Quite frankly, I think Nex would probably have a lot of this stuff as well because I think they're willing to exploit just about any kind of magic they can get their hands on. Vudra, Castrovel.
And the crusading armies too. I mean, to answer the armies of Galarian question, those guys need to be hauling relics in every battlefield they approach.
Right. That's true. That's a good point. And I think there's also one of the elements of this book that I haven't seen the final version of, but was pretty robustly outlined, has to do with like place magic, like Genus Loci or standing stones or ley lines and things like that. And so I think those elements will play into any kind of campaign and things like that.
Yeah, at some point, after we lay down the rules for ley lines. See what I did there? That wasn't even intentional. Once those rules are out there, of course, the next question will follow is, okay, where are, how do these crisscross Galarian? And I believe Mark will be spearheading some of those.
It would be amazing if we had some unannounced books that do exactly that.
Wouldn't that be something?
That'd be something else.
There was a hint to your voice. Actually, speaking of unannounced books, this is kind of a coincidence, but you've had the avatar from your last appearance, which is the Pathfinder Comics City of Secrets. And there hasn't been officially anything announced about what's coming up after City of Secrets.
Right. Well, that's about to change. In fact, it would change probably about now, if not for the Thanksgiving holiday. But next week we'll be announcing something, and I can give you guys a little bit of a scoop on that. The next Pathfinder comic series from Dynamite will be starting in February, and it's going to be called Pathfinder Origins. And it is going to cover 6 individual issues, each of which will focus on one of the 6 main characters from Pathfinder Comics so far. So that's Valeros, Sione, Mauriciel, Ezrin, Kyra, and I'm missing
your avatar.
Harsk the dwarf, and each of them will recount a adventure from their past wherein they teamed up with one of the iconic characters who we have not yet introduced in the comic. So every issue is kind of a team up between one of the existing comic iconics and one of the newer iconics, or not newer icons, but one of the other core iconics who have not yet appeared. So, for example, the first issue features an adventure between Valeros and Emiri. And the reason that I know about that is the other thing that I'm really excited about with Pathfinder Origins, that the writing for the series is being done in-house at Paizo. I am actually writing the first issue, which is the Valeros Emiri issue, and I am writing the last issue, which is the Ezrin Lem issue. James Sutter is writing 2 issues, and Wes Schneider, our editor-in-chief, is writing 2 issues. All 3 of us had stories in the Pathfinder Goblins series that came out last year, and so when our current series writer, Jim Zub, who's been really great, has just been getting so many high-profile projects from Marvel that he didn't have the time to do the Pathfinder comic anymore. We looked around and said, well, who could we get to write this thing? And James and Wes and I kind of looked at each other and said, I think we got 3 guys who might be able to pull this thing off. And so with a little bit of comic scripting experience and, of course, a lot of writing experience and a lot of experience both creating and developing the iconic characters in the Pathfinder world, the 3 of us have collaborated on a storyline that has a linking story between all 6 issues, but wherein each of the 6 issues is pretty much a standalone issue. That starts in February. And goes in a pull-out poster map, a Pathfinder encounter, and a little appendix as well. We're in the process of finalizing all of our scripts right now. Some of the art is already coming in, and it's super exciting, man. This is like, for me, it's like a dream come true getting to write a comic book with these characters we created. So I'm enthusiastic about that. Wes and James are really enthusiastic about it, and you can really see it come through in the scripts. I think that Jim has done a great job sort of developing the characters of these iconic characters, but I think that with that work kind of behind us to some degree, these new stories are going to feel really, really rooted in the Pathfinder world. Going into these characters' backgrounds gives us the opportunity to tell stories that are not just set in Varisia, where the characters are currently, but my first adventure takes place in Nirmathos. The Ezran Lem adventure largely takes place in the city of Absalom, and the other adventures are jumping around the globe as well. So we're going to be seeing elements of the Pathfinder world in the comics that we've never before, and we're going to finally get to meet some of the other iconic characters as well.
Now, doing the math, there's 6 issues, each one with 2 iconics, but there's only 11 base classes in the core rulebook. Does Celtiel get the 12th spot? Presumably written by Wes?
He does. Celtiel, we're doing a Celtiel Sione crossover that basically is like everybody's fantasy all wrapped up in one. The near shirtless goth omnisexual character and the half naked sorceress. It'll be a very tasteful adventure. I'm assured.
I was kind of hoping
Clothing optional.
I was hoping he would team up with Marisiel, because if there's anyone that's going to get into just trouble, it's the 2 of them.
Yeah, well, he and Sione get into a ton of trouble, and Marisiel's got trouble of her own. She's teaming up with Sejan,
Nice.
and yeah, and it also in an adventure kind of tying into Sejan's backstory about his missing sister and things, and fastest writer, he's done with his scripts already, and he's done a fantastic job with that story. You get to learn a lot about Sejan, and I think the juxtaposition between kind of the more carefree Marisiel and the sort of more ordered kind of monk of Sejan is really a neat juxtaposition to see play out on the page.
This is great, because just this past weekend I was talking to some people who were listening to Pathfinder Legends, and they were like, it's great that we really get to know these 5 or 6 core characters that are in the comics and that are in those, but what's Sejan up to? Like, what about the other iconics?
Right, and I think that to some degree, I mean, the Pathfinder Legends audio dramas that Big Finish has been doing, and I hope everyone's had a chance to listen to those. I think they're fantastic. I mean, the voices that they've got, particularly for like Ezran and Harsk, I mean, those are those characters as far as I'm concerned now. They've done such a good job with those. But they really took a cue from what Jim was doing in the comic. And so getting some of these other characters into the mix, you know, for the series after Pathfinder Origins, what characters are we going to use? Well, now we have essentially 12 to choose from instead of 6. And we all know there's even more waiting in the wings, you know, in some of the other books. I think a lot of people are eager to see, you know, Fea the Witch appear in some of the stuff, and some of the other characters from the Advanced Player's Guide and beyond. So I'm just really excited to kind of lift the lid off some of these other characters, and I think we'll start seeing them appearing in things like the Big Finish audios or further comics adventures in the future.
Joe Smith wants to know if the encounters in the back of the comics will be Pathfinder Society viable quests.
That's a great question. Not right now, but now that you've asked that question, I suppose there's every chance in the world that we'll make that happen. That's a good idea. I'll bring it up with the team next week.
On the topic of iconics, can you tell us anything about iconics for the Occult Adventures classes? Or is it too early?
No, it's not only not too early, we've actually already shown 2 illustrations of them in sketch form on the Paizo blog. So we've already shown the Occultist, that Wayne Reynolds has done a sketch of the Occultist, and the Psychic. And I can tell you that both of those characters are very interesting. The Occultist, well, let me do the Psychic first. So we have done now, after the advanced class guide, we have pretty much done every combination of a male and a female of every race in the game. So you've got a male and a female gnome, etc., etc. And so there were a couple of those that we still wanted to plug in with Occult Adventures, but having come to the end of that road, and also frankly having kind of like covered most of the major human ethnicities that appear in Galarian, it gave us some flexibility to do some really interesting and new things that we haven't done with any of the iconics so far. And although it probably is a little bit too early to talk about that, I can say that the female psychic iconic character that we've shown the illustration for is a Vudrani woman, which is to say a woman who appears to be more of an East Indian sort of culture background and or ethnicity. And the occultist, if you look really pretty closely, because he's absolutely covered in gear befitting the class features of the class, and also Wayne Reynolds' uncanny ability to just devote as much
if
detail
ever
as
there were
possible.
a class made for Wayne Reynolds to illustrate.
Right, it was the occultist. It was funny. So the character's just loaded with gear. But if you look beyond the gear, he's also like pretty significantly overweight. So we've got like our first sort of like fat iconic character in the form of the occultist, and we'll be doing some sort of non-racial, non-ethnicity unique things with these iconic characters too. You'll see when they start dropping in the next couple of weeks. But Brandon's seen one we haven't shown yet, and he said he thought it was his favorite iconic so far. That would be the Spiritualist, and she is very different than any character that we've done so far. The Kineticist is also very different from any character that we've done so far, and so it'll be interesting to see how people respond to that. Wayne has done a great job so far, sort of, and I think that I really wish that his schedule had lined up a little bit more with the playtest, because I think in some ways when you see the illustration of these characters, it's even more clear how they fit in. You see the psychic, for example, and you see the occultist. It's easy to see those guys adventuring next to the investigator, or next to Ezrin, or next to Harsk, in a way that might not be quite as obvious just by reading the rules. So the iconics are really, really great, and we're really excited about them, and I think people are going to flip out. They're going to flip out, especially by the Spiritualist, I think is going to be very, very popular.
And you know what, I will say, and it's pretty washed out, but someone nailed the Spiritualist on the boards.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, again.
And again, long before he even got to work, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, among the 250 guesses of what it will be, one of them got pretty close.
I think, from
chance.
our perspective, the story of iconic characters and what they are and how they kind of came up in the first place has been really, really interesting to see develop from sort of the inside. I mean, I probably have gone over this a bunch of times before, maybe even on No Direction, so I'll try and give you the Cliff's Notes version. But when we started as a company, Paizo was doing Dungeon Magazine and Dragon Magazine under license from Wizards of the Coast, and Wizards sort of with third edition had their own kind of iconic characters for third edition, but there wasn't really much to their stories or anything like that, and we didn't really like the way they looked particularly in many cases. And so just to make our lives easier on a monthly magazine schedule, we had Wayne Reynolds create a series of 11 iconic characters that we could just send to our artists. So instead of telling every freelance artist, here's what a ranger is, we said, draw this woman. She's a ranger. And one of the things that really took us aback was people freaked out. They loved these characters. They wanted to know who they were, what their names were, what the story was behind them. And at the time, the story was, we're just trying to save time on a very intensive deadline thing and make our lives easier in-house. but wow, people are really interested in these characters. It was about that time that we learned that Wizards of the Coast would not be renewing our license to continue making the magazines. So at that stage, we were kind of like, well, let's not bother putting a lot more detail into these characters because we're going to not be able to use these characters in very short order anyway, and they were never really designed for that purpose. But when we do our next thing, let's design these iconic characters from the ground up to have a sense of there, if you will, to have stories, to have personalities, to have there be answers for those people who want to know what their stats are or where they came from or what they think of each other. And so we did that with Pathfinder. If you look back at some of the first Meet the Iconic write-ups that we did in the Paizo blog, I mean, they're like 2 paragraphs long. There's really not much to them. But since then, people have become so interested in them, and we've ended up using them so much in things like the comics and like the Big Finish audios, like the Pathfinder adventure card game, that it became important that we actually learn even more about these characters. And, you know, people are freaking out about the Iconics all the time. One of the things I couldn't believe, you know, we put out the Monster Codex not long ago, and this was a product idea that I'd had that I was a little bit nervous about because it had never really been done before, and I wanted to know what people thought of it. So once I realized that Paizo.com subscribers were just starting to get access to their PDFs, which is really the first public comment that happens on really any of our books, I was like looking at the threads on Paizo.com like a hawk, and I'm like, I wonder what people think of this book. Are they going to like it? Are they not? You know, is there things we could do better? You know, et cetera, just all the sort of self-criticizing things that I do with all of our releases. And I'm looking at this thread, and like one of the things that just blew me away is, so there's a couple people say stuff like, oh, what archetypes are in there for my player characters? Or other people who say, oh, there's new monsters. Could you give us a list of the new monsters? But there's at least a couple people who are like, okay, on the chapter openers, the 2-page chapter art, like what iconic characters are featured on those, like, and someone said, well, a lot of the iconic characters are getting killed in this book because this is a monster book, and people are like, which ones and how do they die? And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, you guys, I mean, this is like not the most important part of this book, but I don't get to choose what people think is important. You know, I mean, that's in their heads and in their minds. And the degree to which people have embraced these iconic characters is just staggering to me. And it underlies how important it is that we do a good job with them, like right from the start. So we put a lot of effort into pretty much every aspect of what these characters are all about. And the Occult Adventures Iconics are no different.
So how are we going to learn more about them? Are we going to get more comics? Are they ever going to show up in novels?
Yeah, well, let me answer. That's actually 3 questions you just asked, so let me parse that out a little bit. We don't cover the iconic characters in novels, or at least we haven't to date. We really think that the game novels are better when the authors tell the stories essentially that they want to tell in our world. And so we've had a lot of good luck with a lot of neat, unique characters that come from the Pathfinder Tales novels. And we one day I suppose we probably will feature those characters in a novel, but right now we're not. That's not one of the areas where we want to do them. I knew that when we created them, appendices and sections of game books were an area where we could share some of their statistics and things like that, and maybe say, well, you can use these as pre-generated characters. But even then, what they think about each other, what their history is, all that stuff is a little bit more elaborate than you would need to just kind of run Valoros during a Pathfinder Society scenario, for example. And so, given that these characters are intensely visual, it always was part of my plan that we would explore their stories first and foremost in comic books. I always wanted there to be Pathfinder comics from the very beginning. Have been working diligently to make that a reality pretty much since day one. We've got great partners in Dynamite who've been willing to kind of do what they need to do to bring cool artists and writers to the projects. So I believe that the comics is the best way to reveal more about these characters. Now, that said, what we're posting online right now for Occult Adventures is just Wayne's black and white sketches of these characters. We don't even at this stage know what their names are, what their backgrounds are, etc. That stuff will determine over the next several months, and when the final art comes in the lead up to the release of Occult Adventures, we will be releasing them as pre-generated characters for use in Pathfinder Society. We'll be releasing full Meet the Iconics write-ups for each of the characters on Paizo.com, which is really the sort of the coming out party for all of these characters, and has been traditionally. I don't see that changing for Occult Adventures.
What about the fiction on Wednesdays, the web fiction? Any chance we get iconic web fiction?
It's not something we're planning on doing right now, but I'm sure it would be popular. I think because these things are so important, in many ways we want to be very, very careful about how we reveal information about them. And I think, for example, it might make sense to do like a Mauricio story or something, a short story featuring Mauricio. I know James Jacobs, who created the character, has been keen to do something along those lines. And quite frankly, if James came to me and said, "Hey, boss, I just wrote a short story about Mauricio," I think we would put it up online, that week. Unfortunately, James has got a lot of other stuff he's doing, or I should say, fortunately, James got a lot of other stuff he's doing. But it's not currently our plan to get into the backgrounds within the context of prose fiction. Although, quite honestly, I'm sure that will change at one day in the future. And I think it's more likely that characters who have already been established through Meet the Iconic write-ups, through the comic, those characters are ones we would feel are more like ready-baked, ready to go into something like a novel than somebody who we've never really met in any form before. But that's just how I feel right now. I might feel differently a year from now.
I'm just worried it's going to be a long time before we get the Adventures of Quinn.
I don't know, man. There are people lobbying to fit Quinn in Pathfinder Origins, actually. Quinn is, I would say Quinn and Faya, maybe Amrika, seem to be among the most popular of kind of the secondary and tertiary iconics.
No love for Elaine?
No, I love Elaine, man. I was like, I lobbied heavily for the Cavalier and for the Oracle classes to be in the Advanced Player's Guide. And so Elaine I really, really like. I've put a lot of effort into making some cool miniatures of Elaine in the Pathfinder Battles line. And so he's a character that I have a lot of fondness for. It's not clear to me how much fondness the rest of the world has for that character. I just kind of like him because he's kind of a dick, and he's got blonde hair, basically.
Wait till you see him on a ghost horse.
Yeah.
Is he eating art?
That's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
But
This episode has been great, but it's going a little long, so we've got 2 more questions from the audience that I think are pertinent, and then we'll move to wrap things up. Matthew Wayne Stinson has a question for you, Brandon. He says, if you could write up Rasputin now, would you use any of the occult classes?
Good question.
Oh, that is a fantastic question. Gosh. I would. I'd probably use Mesmerist, actually. I would probably do him as a Mesmerist. I would have to really dig deeper into that class than I currently have. But that would be my first stop. I think he worked well as is, but I think I would certainly dig into the Mesmerist and see what I could do with it. Because again, like I did, I've tried to keep that. Your foundation is always, as again my goal has been with this book, the foundation is always what was what was historical. So I would try to plumb very deeply into all the miracles that were assigned to Rasputin and the abilities and work from there, and that would probably be a very good fit.
And Falcon Lars has a question for you, Erik, because we're constantly told we won't learn more about Gebbon next until you're ready to write it. And now if you've got time to write comics, do you have time to write an entire Gebbon next adventure path?
Wait. Do I have time to write an entire next adventure path?
Yeah.
Hell no, I don't have time for that. I desperately want to write another adventure path adventure. It's been since number 19 since I've done one. I've done a lot of shorter adventure things, like in Thorn Keep and in the Emerald Spire. I did a really crazy high-level Pathfinder Society adventure called Requiem for the Red Raven several years ago. But I've been itching to get back into the adventure path format. The thing that I would really like to do is actually based off of my Kings of Absalom campaign, which, although eventually has something to do with the Spire of Nex, is not in and of itself a Nex thing. I've sort of given up, by the way, on Geb. Like, my marker is off that country. If somebody else wants to do stuff on Geb, they can. But Nex is just like, that one I am sort of crudely just laying claim on. I've got 3 projects right now. I've got the 6th issue of the comic I have to finish. I've got a short article in Pathfinder number 100 that I'm writing, and then a longer article, kind of a Inner Sea Gods section on Eridan that I'm writing for Pathfinder number 100 as well. And once I'm done with those things, I actually don't have a lot on my freelance calendar, so it certainly would be nice to get back to next. I was just having a long conversation on Monday about the Gorin, which is the plant creature that I wrote for Inner Sea Bestiary, which is a next thing, and kind of sent me back into the next realm. I'll get to it, but I mean, let's be honest. Like, the idea of one writer doing 6 volumes of an adventure path is insane. Not just insane because it's too much work for one human, but I think it's a bad choice because not every reader loves every writer, and so if you've got something that just isn't really to your taste, one of the cool things about the adventure path format right now is you know that next month there's going to be a slightly different flavor. If it was just 6 volumes of all of my stuff, you know, I'd love to think people really like what I write, but I'm sure there are some people who would be pretty underwhelmed by that prospect, and I wouldn't want to basically that's not going to happen. I can't do 6 adventure paths. I can barely even do 1. So I appreciate it. I will get to next. There will be more on next, but an entire Erik Mona adventure path. Holy crap, man! I'm getting an ulcer just thinking about it.
So we're going to wrap things up, but if there's any last thing you would like to bring people's attention to, occult related or not, we'll start with you, Brandon. What would you like people to know about?
What would I like people to know about? I just hope people's enthusiasm through the playtest, which I was pretty happy with. I hope that will extend through, and they'll just stick with keeping up with this book and keeping up with us as we progress forward into July, because it's about so much more than the classes. I know the classes tend to get all the love and all the discussion, but there are some really, really incredible options in this book, and I'm looking forward to people seeing those. So, yeah, that, and you know, I can always be kept track of on my Facebook page, which I can be found. My public page, Brandon Hodge Mysterious Planchette, has both my RPG endeavors as well as occult meanderings, which in one way or another always influence that, as Erik knows. So that's where to find me.
And I know you have a toy store. Do you still have your candy store?
I do. Big Top was actually just featured on Candy Craze on the Food Network, another special. And I don't know if that's up on YouTube yet, but that was a really neat, a very fun feature that we did. It's about a 7-minute long feature as part of a large whole of a show. And something just came through. The host and I just kind of cracked up all day, and they caught us on camera just really having a blast, and it shows through. Like, I'm just thrilled with it. I don't normally watch things on that level and be like, oh, how did I do? But after I watched it, I was like, man, that was really awesome. Like, I really, didn't wonder how my voice sounded or anything. I was like, man, that was fun. And, I was like, really, like the guy and I were just smart asses the whole time. And they caught the good parts on camera. So yeah, Big Top's going strong. Monkey see, monkey do. If anybody's in Austin, come see me. I'm easy to find. I love to visit. And yeah, I'm there.
And both of those stores are awesome. I had a chance to visit Brandon in Austin this year, and if you like candy and toys, they're amazing.
Who doesn't like both of those things?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that Venn diagram of candy and toy lovers and Pathfinder players is almost like a full solar eclipse.
And what about you, Erik? Is there anything you think people still need to know?
I don't know. I mean, I think that one of the things that I'd like to do is just thank. Hey, look at there, Ostog the Unslain. Nice. Brandon may have a toy store, but I have a toy of my Pathfinder character. Membership in the upper ranks of Paizo management has its privileges, I guess. I would just end it all basically by saying thanks to everybody. I mean, that we just concluded the playtest for Occult Adventures. We take the playtest feedback super seriously. It's really, really, really a helpful part of the process for us. And we know that a lot of Pathfinder players have put in an extraordinary amount of time kind of taking these classes through their paces, whether they're doing it at the table, like actually rolling dice, or even if they're just sort of taking a look at the stuff and sharing how they feel about it on the website. You know, our team reads every single one of those messages, and it means a lot to us that people are willing to put that level of you know, time and affection into making Pathfinder better for all of us. And so just not only as Pathfinder's publisher, but also as a Pathfinder player, you know, I think it's really important that I just say thank you to everybody who's participated in that process. And I hope and trust that when the final version of the book comes out, you'll see the impact that maybe even your personal comments had made on the final version of the classes. So, as you know, again, it's just the loyalty and the enthusiasm that Pathfinder players have had since the beginning all the way up to today has been phenomenal, and it really keeps us going, and it's much appreciated, not just by me but everybody on the Paizo staff. So that's my main thing, is just thanks for the support and, you know, the effort and the attention, honestly.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us. I think this was our greatest episode of all time. We'll just put that out there.
Oh, what? What?
Whoa!
You say that after every episode.
I say it after every other episode, but
Brandon.
usually when the camera's not on. I had a lot of fun. I think that it was really informative, and I got the sense from the audience that people were just enjoying you guys. So thank you for that.
Awesome.
Excellent.
It's been a pleasure.
Excellent.
Always.
We'll be right back to wrap things up. The interview went long, and there's not a lot of news. So no news segment this time, guys, but we'll be wrapping things up right after this. You guys can stick around if you want. The wrap-up, it'll take us about 2 minutes. Or you can get going, whichever fits your schedule better.
I can stick around for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll stick around for 2 minutes.
2 minutes? All right.
2 minutes of laptop lap burning. Jeez, Louise, this is running hot.
I know. We've been treated to so many different angles of your head, Brandon. It's fantastic.
I have to keep moving, yeah, and I'm stuck in this room because they put my daughter down. So.
If you're looking at his head, you're not taking advantage of the background that we get to see.
I know.
That is
background
amazing.
phenomenal.
Awesome. And just there's the picture over your shoulder where it looks like we've got it looks like a portrait that should have 2 people in it, but I've only been able to make 1 person out.
That one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, there is a second person, but just she fades into the background, so it just seemed like an off-centered portrait, and it was.
Oh yeah. Wait till you see the spiritualist icon. Did I say too much, Eric?
No, that was an awesome hint that I bet went completely over their heads. Nice job.
All right, we'll start the wrap-up in 3, 2, 1. Thank you for joining us for episode 96 of No Direction, the Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Before we go, just want to bring attention to a couple of items that might be of interest to Pathfinder enthusiasts. First is a small creator-owned company called Middle of Beyond. I've been dealing with them in my my day job, my other job, and Middle of Beyond makes cool little interesting trinkets, and so I've got a D20 ornament that's going to be hanging in my Christmas tree this year, and I just got my D20 scarf. That's just really cool. He does what are they called? The not cheesy, but the Christmas sweaters, the Christmas sweaters that are really popular right now because they're so cheesy. He does them with Bigfoot on them, D20s, zombies, things like that. He's just a creative guy. He's a fun guy. He's a good guy to support. So if you're looking for something unique, actually, he's got a really cool D20 floor rug that comes in 2 different sizes and was the main reason that I got in touch with him to begin with. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit different, just to show to the world that you're a gamer, or something to add to your wardrobe or your gaming room, I recommend checking out middleofbeyond.com. Next up, I'm going to do a couple of selfish plugs. We've got Comic Bento. If you know if you've got a fan of comics in your life, Christmas is coming up, and Comic Bento is a Blonde Box subscription service that I'm the project manager of. It's a Blind Ferret production, and I've been given a hard subscription number that I've got to reach by December 15th. So please help me in reaching that by going to comicbento.com, or there will be a link in the show notes so that we as affiliates of Comic Bento, No Direction as affiliates of Comic Bento, get a little bit of extra support from Blind Ferret. But for those who don't know, I can't say this, but if you know of any other subscription service that's really popular, it's a lot like that, only it's completely filled with graphic novels. It's $50 worth of graphic novels for $20, delivered to your door every month. You can subscribe for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and this is a reoccurring thing, it being a subscription. It's really cool. Mark Moreland was a subscriber up until recently, and he had nice things to say about it. And then finally, as people may have noticed, I have grown a terrible mustache. This is all in the name of Movember.
It's beautiful, man. It's
I
beautiful.
hate it. I cannot wait until December 5th when I'm going to shave it, possibly on camera. I'm raising money. If you go to movember.ca/geekmogether, then you can find my page. If I raise $200, then I will shave a goat into the back of the head, which was requested by one of my listeners. If I can raise $500, I am going to dye my hair the color of a listener's choice. Hey, Brandon. I know. I need a haircut, too. So, yeah, sometime in the space of January after Christmas pictures and mid-February when we've got new baby pictures to take, I'm going to dye my hair some crazy punk rock color, and you get to help me decide, but only if I raise $500 in the name of men's health and just men's awareness. Let's stick with men's health. Until next time, thank you for joining me once again, Brandon and Eric. Thank you for co-hosting with me, Anthony. I'm Ryan Costello Jr. And
I'm Anthony Lee.
Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
And this is my dog, Tiny.
Hi, Tiny.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, I've got a cat on the desk now. So this is a great time to end, I suppose.
If you want to find the path, you need No Direction.